All right. I just clicked to record to the computer, so fingers crossed. Someone else started recording, so I don't know if it's a cloud or a computer recording, but we'll figure that out afterwards. Everyone, welcome to the last in the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange webinar series. The topic of this webinar is digital accessibility and kind of what is digital accessibility and how to implement digital accessibility, the technical aspects of digital accessibility, and also the digital accessibility policy within your organization. My name is Justin Harford, and I'm a program specialist with the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange. And I am joined here by a couple of presenters who we'll just have them introduce themselves in a little bit. We'll just kind of go through and do some introductions. We'll talk to cover the outline. We'll talk a little about what digital accessibility is and what a policy might look like. Then we'll kind of look at what are some of the things that you should do to implement a digital accessibility policy in your organization. And then we'll talk about the some examples of how that's being done uh, at uh, at AFS International, which is one of the presenters here who's going to join us. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have time for your questions. If you would like, with this workshop is captioned, so you just click the captions button and you should be able to see those. And a recording will be made available after the presentation, and it will include those captions as well. So you will be able to access that on YouTube, and it will be accessible. So that's great. So let's go ahead and without any further ado, we can go ahead and start moving on to our introduction. So you already know who I am, so why don't we go ahead and go on to our other presenters. Let's start with Kiara.
Thanks, Justin. Hi, y'all. I'm Kiara Castro. My pronouns are she, her. I am a Latina woman that's white with blue eyes, glasses, blonde curlyish hair, and today I am wearing a brown and white polka dot dress. I am a passionate disability advocate, educator, and program manager with a career spanning across U.S. government programs, early childhood education research, disability advocacy, and community-based development. Before stepping into the world of global development, I have a career and a lifetime being a disabled individual. So I like to say that my career as a consultant, as someone who's worked in program management at organizations like World Learning and the United Nations Development Program, I have always found myself in the disability space and doing disability policy and program implementation. I'm really excited to be here with y'all today and share my expertise, and I'm going to pass it over to Molly.
Thank you, Kiara. Nice to be with you all today. My name is Molly Stern. I go by she, her pronouns as well. Um, I'm a white US American, and I am based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I work for AFS Intercultural Programs, and my job title is Global Up Manager. So I'm working with a global competence curriculum that supports universities around the world to develop global competence in students, staff, and faculty. Um, Today, I'm on my Zoom camera, but I have a background that says celebrating 10 years of our global competence certificate at AFS, and I have a black and brown checkered blazer on. It's nice to be with you all, and I'm so honored to be a guest on today's topic.
Hmm. Molly, congrats on that anniversary. That's quite a milestone.
Thank you very much.
So we're gonna on slide 4. I'll just give a couple remarks on digital accessibility, and then we'll pass it on to Kiara, and then on to Molly. And so generally, slide 4, it's just what is digital accessibility? What do we mean by that? Well, digital accessibility is all of the features and functions that within documents, within applications, pretty much anything in the virtual environment that make it usable to people with all types of disabilities. Typically, I think typically it's a very specific disability set to some extent. Mostly we're talking about accessibility for blind people, low vision people, and deaf and hard of hearing folks. To some extent, also, you're talking about plain language and limiting distracting elements and things like that, looking at good contrast. But a lot of it is really kind of looking at making sure that online virtual resources are usable and accessible to people who might have either sensory or learning type disabilities. And going on to slide 5, what is a digital accessibility policy? So the idea of this is we have a digital accessibility policy is the policies, rules, and procedures within an organization that you follow that cause digital content to be created over time within your organization, and also that cause applications, software that's accessible to be procured over time. So, again, looking at digital accessibility in all of its aspects, document creation, websites, and also software. And so the digital accessibility policy is what ensures that all of that is implemented over time as your staff are coming and going and as different projects are being initiated and concluded. And so that's a really important part of it, right? So earlier in the series, we talked a little bit more about the technical aspects of web accessibility, but in this workshop, we'll talk a little bit more about what the policy side at the organizational level in your organization looks like to make sure that that happens. So gonna pass it on now to my associate Kiara.
Thanks, Justin. Before we dive into what digital accessibility policy includes, the first step is to make sure that when you're proposing a strategy that you create that strategy before diving into that policy. From values to actions, building a digital accessibility with strategy is key. Let's like start to think about this through the big picture. How do you and your company turn values around inclusion, around accessibility into actual policy, systems, decisions, standards into our digital work? And I know that that kind of feels lofty and huge and kind of big when we're first kind of looking at it, but that's why we have that strategy to kind of help us when we're starting to write that policy, when we're developing that policy, when we're thinking about the nitty-gritty of implementing that policy. We want to make sure, like Justin was saying, we want to make sure it's sustainable and long term. And that's why we want to propose a strategy to kick things off before we fully dive into the how to. So I'm going to start by reading off the 2 bullet points on my slide, and then we'll kind of dive into more about my strategy. So first, developing a digital accessibility policy, like I said, starts with strategy. So turning inclusion into systems, not just statements. Oftentimes, when we think about companies and our missions and our values, there's a lot of statements. So we want to make sure that each of our statements in that strategy are actionable and things that we can implement throughout the system. So whether that's a website, whether that's providing documents, we want to make sure that all aspects of our strategy, of our mission statements are accessible. Next part of the next bullet point on the slide reads, and we want to lay the foundation to make sure it's sustainable for change. So strategy gives us that structure. It helps us set that goal. It builds team alignment, which we all need. And it turns those good intentions into real, measurable progress, which is great. So today, I'm going to begin by exploring how we can propose these internal strategies with your team. And then just a quick reminder, you don't need to be on leadership to drive these efforts. You can be an early career professional. You could even be an intern, because we want to make sure that that policy is clear and there's a plan and that everyone can be brought into the picture. You don't need to be the highest level, although you're more than welcome to be the CEO or CFO and be implementing these change. We want to make sure that we're bringing everyone along with this process. All right, next slide. Great. So why does strategy matter? So I've already talked a little bit this on the last slide, but I want to break this down even more. So to truly embed accessibility into our digital work, we have to treat the strategic priority not just as a one-off task, but as an ongoing situation. So why does this strategy matter? I'm going to read off my bullet points on the slide. So first, defines where we are, where we're going, and where we want to be. Next, it shifts accessibility from reactive fixes to proactive and human-centered designs. Third, it builds collaboration and shares ownership across that team. Like I was saying in the last slide, you don't need to be in the C-suite of your team in order to make and implement these changes. We want to make sure that strategy empowers even the folks who are just joining our companies to feel like they can collaborate and be a part of the strategy to build digital accessibility. Fourth, it aligns with legal standards such as ADA, Section 508, and the WCAG. And lastly, it reduces the risk of reinforcing our sorry, I have a stutter. Reduces digital exclusion while reinforcing your team's values and company mission. It shifts us from, like I said in the beginning, reactive to accessibility barriers and allows us to be proactive in protecting them so that eventually accessibility becomes second nature. It's about embedding across the foundation of how we design, build, and deliver digital experiences. It's a clear strategy that helps us meet legal requirements and reduces the risk, and more importantly, reinforces every individual company's missions and values. All right, next slide, please. So now we can begin diving into digital accessibility policy. Now that we've spent that time kind of thinking about what goes into the strategy, it's important to think about why digital accessibility matters and now that we've proposed that strategy, let's talk about what actually goes into building that policy. So a digital accessibility policy is more than a statement. Like I said before, it's a strategy, it's a framework, it's a roadmap, honestly. It outlines for your organization and makes inclusion real. Your content, your tools, your team's processes, your day-to-day decisions in the digital world are rooted in lived experiences and rooted in the experiences of those around us with disabilities. So by addressing those real world barriers that people with disabilities and disabled users have, you're making a clear statement to ensure successibility long term. Speaking from experience, I can't tell you how many times I've had to create, support, and audit digital accessibility policies because as a disabled and neurodivergent myself, I found that companies' websites where I was working or documents that were being shared with me or presentations lacked the accessibility technology to support myself and others with disability. And some of those assistive technologies, like voice to text, text to speech tools, consistently ran into barriers within my teams and within companies that I've worked for policies. We shouldn't let that happen. So we should ensure accessibility is built into our content, tools, and training processes from the start. Great. Next slide, please. So now that we've kind of talked about why digital accessibility policy matters, we've talked about the strategies, now we can talk about where to begin. And if you're worried about where to begin, it's okay. Take a deep breath. We can do this without making it super overwhelming. So to get started, I recommend to start with an audit of your website, your internet and digital tools. That might look like as simple as taking stock of what's already there and where barriers to accessibility might already be. This can be as straightforward as reviewing high traffic pages or key internet platforms or documents to ensure accessibility, like missing alt text, low colored contrast, or keyboard navigation problems. On the right-hand side of your screen, I've included two photos. One photo shows an accessibility check that is built into the Microsoft programming that already exists. So the goal is not to fix everything overnight. First, you need to identify key accessibility barriers, and I recommend, honestly, quick win improvements. This means that, like I just shared about the picture to the right, some of the tools that we're already using in the workplace provide small auditing processing, such as doing an accessibility check when sharing a Word document or a PowerPoint with your team internally or externally. I find it meaningful and doing these little improvements very achievable, even on a smaller scale. That might mean adjusting the headers of structures, improving the labels, adding, like I said, alt text to images, checking for color contrast. These are things that you can find with a built-in accessibility tool that you might already have within your team. And although this might be seen as a low effort, it provides a high impact. And it can create a habit within your team that can make a huge difference. Great. Next slide. I like to think that this starts building our momentum and helps make accessibility not feel paralyzing or something that your team might not feel like it can achieve. So when you're thinking about putting that pen to paper and writing out what your digital accessibility policy should include, I want to break down some very simple steps and things that your team should be looking at. Number one, clear standards. A strong digital accessibility policy should clearly state which accessibility standards your organization would like to follow. These often include global and regional standards such as the WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the Americans with Disability Act, the ADA, or Section 503 compliance in the United States. Number two on the list is to assign responsibilities. Who will be in charge of implementing and writing the policy on your team? This policy should define who on your team is responsible to ensure these standards are met, and whether the individual team members, specific departments, or if there's going to be an internal accessibility committee. If your team does not have the capacity or the expertise in-house, I recommend that you might consider hiring an accessibility consultant or using and paying for an automatic auditing tool such as Wave Web Accessibility Evaluation Tool. Or if you're looking to kind of build out the sustainability of this long term, build in internally how you can train your and policies and procedures to be embedded within your disability policy. Your policy could have a point staff who has done a recognized training and certificate program like those offered at Detroit University, or free modules from the World Wide Web Constitution or W3C to build in team-wide fluency, accountability around digital access. You can also consider having a member of your team receive an IAAP credential or a CPAA competency score certificate. And I'm happy to provide links to where you can find all these at the end of the presentation. Both of these two exams are recognized worldwide to ensure digital accessibility and something that your team can handle if you're looking for sustainable long-term commitment to these values. And lastly, we want to make sure that your policy is a living document. We want to make sure that there's regular reviews and accountability to make sure that the document continually gets updated. And as different gaps or needs for digital accessibility are found, you are willing to work with and make changes to ensure that your accessibility policy is changing and adapting to the needs around you. Next slide.
Sarah, we have a question. What was the name of the tool that you in the chat mentioned the tool?
Oh, of course. So one of the tools that you can download that is free is the Wave Web Accessibility Evaluation Tool. There is also a few different paid auditing tools that exist. And that goes for courses as well. There are quite a few free modules, such as the W3C, which is a free module you can take to learn about how to make your different websites accessible, to learn about how to make documents accessible. But then again, to count, like the counterpoint of that is that there's also certifications that you can take and your team can take that will provide the next kind of level. Like these are credentials that are viewed worldwide as the standard. I hope that kind of answers that question. Great. Okay, so the next slide, I'm going to start talking about the technical requirements for digital accessibility. So a strong digital accessibility policy should reflect your organizational's values and long-term inclusion. Like I said at the end of my last slide, your policy should be a living document and be able to change. And at minimum, should include, and I'm going to read the 4 bullet points off my slide, a commitment to making digital content, tools, technologies accessible to people with disabilities. Second, it should follow a defined and clear standard, as I talked about before. That includes the ADA Section 503 and WCAG, so that way everyone knows what to look to for where success is and what standards they should be following to ensure digital accessibility. Next, we want to make sure that there's defined roles and responsibilities across your team. And these should be outlined within your policy. So again, from leadership to communications to who's doing the development, the procurement, HR, and beyond. We want to make sure that each role is clearly defined in your policy, and so that way you know who to look to when you have questions about different aspects of your policy. And lastly, we want to process for implementation, testing, and long-term maintenance. So accessibility doesn't stop after launch. I don't know if this main point about how this should be a living document isn't, I really want to make sure that that's sunk in. Accessibility is never done. Honestly, I could have conversations about this over and over and over, but even if your team's missing something, don't take that as a failure or take that as something that you've made a mistake. Sure, it might be a little mistake, but use it as a growing opportunity. Your policy should be clear and should especially for our disabled users, we want to make sure that whenever a barrier or an issue arises, that we're addressing it and we have the bandwidth to address it. So making sure that we're doing that implementation, testing, and maintenance kind of on a constant cycle is so important as a technical requirement of your policy. All right, one last slide. So I hope that y'all have kind of got the picture about how your policy should be long living. So this slide, I just really want to think about that's how to make and design your digital accessibility policy to be sustainable. So we've already talked about the standards. I've talked to you about how you need to be giving out individual roles. We've talked about the strategy, and I've talked about how the ongoing importance of this being a living document. But now I want to shift to how do we make sure that our digital accessibility policy, internally and externally, is sustainable and meaningful. So that includes adding a feedback loop and mechanisms for users, especially those with disabilities, to report issues. Because even with the best intentions, we're always learning. To update our procedures and practices to make sure tools and platforms are accessible from the start. To provide training and education to all staff, not just your tech teams, to understand how they can contribute to accessibility. So think about that Microsoft accessibility check I talked about. Think about color contrasting, and think about little ways in which you can make sure that your team is constantly being trained and having digital accessibility be a part of like their day-to-day tasks. And lastly, setting regular times to review and do improvement because standards should evolve. And finally, ensuring accountability at every level, from leadership to team levels. This work must be owned and supported by your entire team. And remember what I shared earlier, that you don't need to be a team lead to make effective change. If your team needs to implement a digital accessibility policy, you can do that at any level, whether you're entry level to C-suite. These elements is what builds up that policy that will eventually live on the piece of paper. And I want to make sure that y'all remember that accessibility doesn't happen by accident. It happens through design. And that design starts with us. It starts with me, it starts with you, it starts with your team, your decisions, and your shared commitment. Now I'm going to hand it over to Molly, who's going to talk us through some real world examples.
Wow. Well, I just have to say I'm inspired by your presentation. I'm taking notes over here too. Um, and I'm nodding in agreement constantly as you were speaking. Thank you, Kiara. That was so well stated. And the living document, I mean, yes, exactly that, because you've given me fresh ideas for how we can even do more around accessibility. So I have an example I was going to share in today's presentation of digital accessibility in our Global Competence Certificate program. Um, we are so lucky to have known about MyUSA from the early days of when we started building this global competence curriculum. It went from being an in-person orientation, pre-departure orientation, to this kind of big lift to make it all virtual and bring it into the digital world. And with that came questions around accessibility. So the first iteration of our digital curriculum, the Global Competence Certificate, was actually in a learning management system that we found to not be accessible and to not be, it didn't have ADA compliance as part of its platform. So with the help of MyUSA, we have selected a learning management system called Bridge, and we designed our digital content to be easy to see and hear, so perceivable, easy to use, operable, easy to understand, understandable, which means that all learners, our intent is that they're able to access the content no matter their abilities. And as a nonprofit educational organization, it's part of our mission to be highly inclusive, and we want to follow all the accessibility laws and best practices, as many of our partners are also higher ed institutions in the United States and are also, wanting to make sure they're compliant with accessibility laws and best practices as well. Can go to the next slide. So some of the key accessibility features with our learning management system, where we're housing this global competence curriculum, include the ability to turn closed captioning on for our animated videos. With the closed captioning, because we built this program for a world audience, it does include multiple language options to select from. and it's adjustable in the video playback speeds. So either slowing it down or increasing the speed is available. Um, it has screen reader compatibility, JAWS for Windows, and VoiceOver for Mac. And we also reviewed our additional resources that we provide outside of the learning management system too, including PDFs that we equip our learners with. Can go to the next slide. Um, we have text alternatives. So we provide text alternatives for any content that is not text, like images, icons, and videos. We have text alternatives that make our content more flexible and easier for everyone to understand, to access and understand. And this specifically can serve people who need to use large print, braille, screen readers, uh, speech aspects, symbols, and simpler words. And we include this as well in our Google slide decks as well when we have images up on the screen. The time-based media that I mentioned, it provides alternatives for time-based media. So again, with the examples that are displayed on our screen right now, you can see that there's closed captioning available with multiple languages that a learner could select from German, English, and Spanish, and there's more languages embedded into the program. And the playback speed, again, it could be slowed down to like 75% or increased to double time if needed. There's audio descriptions, and we avoid having flashing content as part of our animated videos as well. In this learning management system, again, it's called Bridge. Take a look at if that's something that you'd be interested in, maybe moving content to. It does offer dark modes, and that is how users can engage with the platform in high contrast, exceeding standards at a 7:1 ratio. And many of our learners also prefer dark mode as well. So um, there's also this aspect when you kind of make things more accessible, you find that it serves even more than maybe you originally intended to serve. The multiple languages. So one really amazing aspect of Bridge is that the native reader of this program, it can actually be changed into 25 languages. So that means like instructions around how to use the platform are all available in these multiple languages as a default. And then because we're a worldwide international organization, we also have translated our content into many different languages to, expand the reach and breadth of the audience as well. With our PDF, so criteria that we consider when we develop these additional resources, the accessibility review evaluated the document. There are some Acrobat, tools for rating the accessibility of your PDFs. So we run those tests that help us kind of identify if we're meeting all the accessibility standards and what failed and what could be, improved. So it goes over document structure. Um, so we have tags and language reading order, title and bookmarks, as part of our PDFs, page content, tab order, character encoding, multimedia, Flickr and links in there, forms and form fields that are accessible. And then again, those alternate text for images and elements, table structure with headers, list and heading hierarchy, and color contrast. So there's an image up on the screen of kind of what our participant handbook looks like. And it's sort of like a journal that participants can use alongside the content that they're going through in modules with those animated videos, quizzes, and forum discussions. So it's an additional resource. So when we run an accessibility report on our PDFs, and this is just one example of the additional resources we have as part of our program, here we have, what the report looks like when it comes back. So the summary of running our PDF handbook included the checker found problems which may prevent the document from being fully accessible. And the bullet point reads that needs manual, or there's like two issues to check. Um, what passed, it has like 11 aspects of the manual passed and 18 failed. And then in the detailed report, it actually goes through and says like tag content status failed. And the description says all page content is tagged, or tagged annotations passed, all annotations are tagged. So it gives kind of a rundown of what is failing, what is passing. And that's something that we just ran right through Acrobat PDF reader. And then we have our team members go in and, address anything that's failed to make it even more accessible, and try and get a better report as we continue to improve our resources. That is just like a little case study of what we're working on and kind of what it looks like in like the day-to-day real life work of, taking a digital education program and working, again, closely. Justin's been such a great partner to have over the years and in terms of helping us find the proper resources to make sure that our content is meeting accessibility standards. So big shout out to Mayusa for constantly advocating and helping organizations, realize these efforts. And then Kiara, amazing resources that you've also provided as well. Thank you.
We have a couple of questions in the chat, and I think y'all are probably open to taking some more.
Indeed.
Would you like me to read those, or?
Yes, please, Lori.
First question was, does the Wave tool check for color contrast, or do you recommend something else?
This is Kiara speaking. I assume that this question is directed towards me. So the Wave accessibility tool, it provides it kind of has two different functions. And I recommend looking at the tool to for whatever need is best for you and your team. So yes, it does provide, similar to what Molly was talking about. It will the audit it does will break down kind of where your team, whether it's a web page or whatever data test you're trying to kind of do for digital accessibility, will break down how it can support. So whether that's color contrast, alt text, if it's like a standalone, infrastructure testing, it kind of provides all those different types of tools. There's a few different, not just Wave was just one example. There's many different evaluation tools. And Molly, you just shared about one as well. So if you want to hop on and kind of talk about the tool that you and your team use as well.
I was going to see, Justin, did you have anything you wanted to add to that before?
I thought that was brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I think our team comes across these tools like, oh, we should check our PDF. And then it's like, oh, like I didn't even know Acrobat had an accessibility report that you can run. Like this is really great. Love to hear if anyone has experience where it's not actually meeting that standard, because those tools are also always in development as well. And then with AI, I'm wondering if there's anything that's even better out there, that people have found and are using, because that would be really interesting to hear about as well.
I'd be really curious if people can upload a PDF to ChatGPT and have it, or to Gemini and have it give feedback on contrast and things like that.
Exactly. That would be really neat.
Yeah. Lori, are there any other questions?
There is. Is there a best practice for having PDFs on websites? I know there was a SCOTUS case in 2024 that made some institutions not able to have PDFs on web pages, something due to reader accessibility.
Hmm. Any thoughts, guys? I could certainly comment. I couldn't comment about the SCOTUS case. This is kind of news to me. I'd be curious now to know what it was about, but I can say that it's good practice generally to have an HTML version of any information that's conveyed in a PDF, and also to favor HTML when it comes to forms that people fill out. But that said, sometimes organizations distribute guidebooks and uh, documents like that in PDF form, or sometimes a PDF version of an HTML document is better for certain things like sending over email or transmitting to another person, or sometimes people just prefer PDFs, I guess, for book readers. And my sense of it is that typically when if you have a setup where the PDF opens fully in a separate page, in a separate tab, that usually tends to work. I believe like for us, we'll distribute PDFs from our website, which is a WordPress website, and I believe that we use a pretty standard feature for hosting and downloading PDF documents. Typically, the way that works is the link opens into a separate tab, and then you have the PDF. In which you can confirm that with yours by looking at the URL in the domain box and check to make sure that there's a .pdf extension at the end of it. And one thing and I could just comment it from my personal experience as a user of screen reading software, I can say that it's really hard to deal with PDFs that where they don't allow you to download the PDF, because sometimes you can, as the user, download a PDF that's not as great and you can remediate it yourself using tools on your computer. But that's hard to do when certain types of PDF viewers are used, where you don't actually have access to the PDF directly. And I can't think of any particular examples of programs and at any rate, I probably shouldn't name anybody anyway, but you can tell when a PDF is directly downloadable by the fact that there's a PDF extension in the URL, and versus when it's not, when it's just a display, like an embedded display on the web page, and that's a lot. The embedded version is a lot harder to deal with. But yeah, I'd be curious to know more what that SCOTUS case was about, if anybody has any more info though.
Actually, someone provided a link
Mm,
to it. It was a DOJ ruling
mm,
in April of last year on accessibility of web content and mobile apps provided by state and local governments.
mm, mhm.
I can
It's
share
one of the
that link.
hardest things, one of the things that, historically, like state and local governments have preferred to distribute forms, for example, in PDF. So it's effectively you have to get the PDF on your computer and print it out and fill it out by hand, and it definitely is it makes things harder to deal with in terms of getting government tasks done. So I almost wonder if it might have related to that.
Hmm.
But I don't know. I shall have to look more into that DOJ ruling. What do you think, Molly and Kiara? Anything to
Yeah.
add?
This is Kiara speaking. I was just gonna add that I, off the top of my head, I don't remember all the exact parts of this ruling, but I do know that the standard, so back to kind of what I was saying, is making sure that you understand what standards you should be following for your digital accessibility. I do the standard that was set based on that ruling was the WCAG standard that I was talking about during my presentation. So if you're unsure if your PDF um, is it fully accessible or is downloadable, I would go through and make sure that you're meeting that technical standard of the WCAG, I believe 2.1 or 2.2 off the top of my head. But yeah, make sure you're meeting that. Another thing that I was kind of like what Justin was saying is that the person with a disability that maybe is trying to access with your PDF is the expert themselves, and different people use different tools. For example, someone might be using JAWS or NVDA as an accessibility tool for like screen readers. So what my recommendation is if you're going to be putting up a PDF on your website, you should always have um, an alternative to that PDF available, whether that's if requested or also available on your website to kind of partner that PDF document, um, just as like a basic rule of thumb. Molly, anything you want to add?
I just wanted to amplify what you said, that it's maybe approaching this topic with like humility of asking who you're trying to serve to help you understand if you met the mark, and learning what tools they're actually using to, yeah, read those PDFs could be helpful in informing like how you could, improve the best practice of your PDFs and web pages and forms. Because you might try and do everything right, and then you find out it's still failing. And so just even like showing a lot of curiosity about, what else could you be missing that could be helpful, and asking the audience that you're trying to serve is really useful. So thank you for adding that.
I know if I have a problem with my iPhone, I can email accessibility@apple.com, and that usually gets you the fast track to who you need to talk to. And I always hope we don't have accessibility at myusa.com.org, but I always hope that people kind of assume that they could write to us and pester us given the nature of what we do. But I mean, things like accessibility at AFS Intercultural or accessibility at university.edu, things like that are probably good places to start, making sure there's that resource for people to just write to somebody.
Mhm.
I'm curious about with Molly and Kiara. I don't have as much personal experience using automated testing solutions, although I do recall many years ago I did tinker with one, and it came up with a lot of, like, I tested a website that I had written, and it came up with a lot of errors that I think I was able to work through, but I think if I was maybe a little less technical, it might have seemed a little cryptic, some of the errors. And then I remember it gave off a lot of things that were like kind of not as important, really. And that was like 15 years ago. But I know in the old days, like those tools sometimes would give off a bunch of results, and maybe 50% of it might have just been noise. But I'm curious if you ever noticed that, like when using tools like Wave or tools like in Microsoft Office, if it's still that way, like if you sometimes find that it makes sense to sort of triage certain errors that it gives you over others.
I think yes, even in, what I shared with the Acrobat accessibility report, yeah, it definitely comes up with a list, and but going through but one by one, you can see like, oh, actually that looks like we have, figured out a way to make that compliant, although it showed that it failed in the test. So I think you're right. Some of those still can be kind of buggy, um, and aren't necessarily like 100% foolproof. And that's what I was kind of thinking when Kiara was talking about this being like a living document, but it's also these tools that are out there are still probably trying to get better and better, and hope this is where maybe AI for good, right? Of helping you go at least have a list to work from. If you can, take something that you're really trying to bring and make more accessible, if it can highlight some key elements that would be useful to look at. But yeah, I would agree with you, Justin, that it still gets kind of finicky sometimes, and maybe too detailed on some of the things that it finds.
Yeah, this is Kiara speaking, just so y'all know. I was just going to share that if you choose to use like an assistive technology tool to do an accessibility audit, whether that's Wave or Axe, or I forget again the name that Molly's been using of her tool, the tool, but this should be complementary to also a human being. Because nothing beats a human being and having people having eyes on the document as well. Because like Justin was saying, like the tool might be able to share that there's missing alt text. It might be able to help you identify different form, like where you need to have labels on a PDF or labels on a document. It might be able to share where headings are getting redundant or where links are missing, things like that. Like it might be able to point out these things, but you should also be having a human being be trained on how these tools, the AI tools work, and also be kind of that next pair of eyes that kind of overlayer that 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 assistive technology support, if that makes sense. That's my main recommendation is that you should be doing this in tandem, and not just throwing something and hoping it fits, if that makes sense. Because it might not fit, and there might be a better tool or a better training that might exist out there that fits your needs.
Lori, do we have any other questions in the chat?
There was just a follow-up question about what are the certifications you recommend?
Oh, Kiara is the queen of certs. You named a lot.
Yeah, I do know a lot of different certifications, and I'm happy to also. Um, I know for like with my processing disorder, sometimes when people speak at me, I will do my best to write it down, but sometimes I just realize it's better to listen. So I'll also provide Justin with a list that, Justin, if you don't mind sharing out, as well as like the recording and things that can be shared with folks. Um, the two that I talked about today, because there are many, but the two I talked about was DQ University. This is a paid, like you must pay to get the certifications. But this is one of the certifications that are viewed as like a standard, um, that folks can take these different tests. And some of these are on just basics on like how do you understand the policies that exist, whether it's the WCAG policy and standard. They also have courses that follow how do you like how do you make a PDF accessible? Like they have all different courses. The place that gives free, if you're interested in free modules, that would be the W3C. They do like help with fluency and accountability and kind of provide like a free version of that. But the main big certification that's globally recognized, so whether you're in the United States or in India or in the UK or Costa Rica, that's the IAAP credential of certification for professionals in accessibility core competencies. The acronym is CPACC for short, but that's kind of like the big certification where if you and big test to take. So if you want to become someone who's an auditor or who's implementing digital policies or a consultant or kind of the lead on your team, that's the big exam or the big test you should be taking, kind of like how folks do accounting tests or different thing or like a real estate license test. This is for the digital accessibility for people with disabilities or for folks who are elder and need technology support. That's the big certification that I recommend slash is like globally recognized.
Thanks, Kiara. How much is one of those courses on DQ, Kiara?
Off the top of my head, I can't say I know, Justin. I do believe that they do like annual and like monthly subscriptions, kind of like if you take like a online course at a local community college, or I want to say somewhere between $400 to probably $800, somewhere in that ballpark. But if someone is on the website and knows the correct number, that would be very helpful right now. But I don't know it off the top of my head.
I see 400 for full access and then 250 for kind of medium access.
Oh, interesting. So 400 for like multiple courses and stuff.
Yeah,
Correct.
looks like that's a subscription for a year.
Basically the cost of not less than a conference registration.
Exactly.
So it's not too bad. It's so DQ University, but not necessarily like university tuition prices necessarily. So
And I will, this is Kiara again. I will share that there are universities across the country who offer courses similar. Like I believe the University of Minnesota has some courses. There are some courses on digital accessibility at a few Canadian universities. So depending on where you're located, and if you want in person or hybrid or online, there are quite a few universities that are starting to tap into this as well.
yes, and I know when you mentioned DQ, I have a friend who's a blind woman who actually completed those courses, and then that ended up being partly what helped her to get into a job as an accessibility specialist at a large, well-known corporation. And so it's definitely DQ is definitely well known too. So
And and just to plug, I know we have 2 minutes left. I believe right now DQ is offering, if you're an individual with disabilities, I believe they're offering scholarships right now. So if that's something as a person with a disability, if you're interested in um, doing kind of like what Justin and I have done of like diving deep into digital accessibility, whether that's for yourself or for where you work, I know that they're offering some scholarships and things for individuals who identify with disabilities.
indeed, thank you for that tip, Kiara. Lori, is there any other questions waiting for us in the chat?
Some gratitude expressed for this great webinar.
Brilliant.
Wonderful.
Well, I have gratitude for all of you, Molly and Kiara, who pretty much presented it. You know, I just kind of sat here and looked good. And then Lori, who made sure things didn't collapse, and Jolene, who took captions. Yeah, thank you all so much. And thank you to the approximately 20 or 23 or so folks who were hanging out with us for this whole presentation. That's an awesome attendance rate. I appreciate you all as well. I hope that you'll contact us if you have any questions about accessibility in your organization. I actually presented a webinar earlier in the series, and I believe my associates were mentioning about examples of accessibility. And if you want to see if all this seems a little abstract to you, that webinar will be a good way for you to get some real kind of tangible observation to see exactly how different accessibility changes really impact the user experience. Please keep an eye out for a satisfaction survey that we will send out very soon on this webinar. Your feedback really helps us to make sure that we're continuing to offer quality and relevant content to all of you. And also keep an eye out, and if you have a colleague who missed the webinar, keep an eye out for a recording as well as slides and a list of certifications that will be made available probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks. We'll be in communication about that. So thank you all so much for your support and for joining us for this webinar series. That is a wrap, but hopefully we'll get to do this again next year. So you all have a great rest of your week.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Justin and Kiara, for a lovely.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.